I do recall Kevin saying, "This is a cult." If you had looked at Jody's Google reviews, there were a lot of people on there that also said this was a cult. In my ignorance, I didn't know what a cult was, and I didn't know how a cult functioned.
I don't know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. All I know is at some point in that month of March, and picked Jody up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, like, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into, so they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently.
So today, very interestingly, Paige Hannah, who was an associate / colleague / friend of Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt, has made her second video. And I didn't discuss it originally because she said she was going to make a part 2.
Over time, I recognize that Jody purposely put herself on a pedestal, not just so you would see her as a god, but because she believed she was a god.
Now that she has spoken out more in part 2, there are quite a lot of discrepancies, some similarities to what she was saying based off of Kevin Franke's police interview, his second one.
And Ruby was always jealous of the Hannahs, that they had a better relationship with Jody than she did.
I came here again, and you best believe that I've been highlighting, I've been doing my notes, because I just wanted to be able to listen to her second part, because it's really quite interesting listening to the differences, especially when she starts talking about cults and how she didn't think she was in one. Kevin says something completely different. Jody Hildebrandt was taken in because Paige Hannah and her husband wanted to try and introduce her to a new cult, to build a bigger cult. And I think it is really interesting.
Merge their cults into one, apparently. And
they refer to it as a cult at the time?
Oh, no. No one in a cult says, I'm in a cult.
Two cult leaders merging together.
From where I stand now, absolutely.
Paige Hannah, like I've already said, she was a colleague, and she has since come out with 2 videos. Her channel's called Under the Rug, Out of the Rug, and the reasoning behind that is actually something I didn't even realize. Her and Ruby in 2020, I think, they wanted to start a YouTube channel talking about parenting or whatever they were trying to talk about, and it was going to be called Under the Rug.
Ruby, I did know that Child Protective Services was called on you. I had no idea it was from a video with a bidet with your kids playing in it. Like, what did that feel like when they took something that far completely out of context?
Well, the video was so well done, I started thinking, oh my gosh. Like, the first thing I did was look at me, and I thought, I started feeling a little crazy, like, that video is very convincing. Like, maybe I am off. And I started going back and going, okay. There was another video that she got of me putting a cookie in the kid's hand, and the cookie was warm, and it was like, ooh, like an abusive mom there. Like, she should have made sure the cookies were cool before she put the cookie in the kid's hand. And I thought, yeah, maybe she's right.
But it was around that time that Paige Hannah started realizing that Ruby Franke was basically devoting her whole entire life finally following Jody Hildebrandt.
And as we were doing this channel, I thought I would be able to help her see how these are beneficial through the lens of love, rather than the lens of control.
I think the reasoning why she made the video is because no one had really discussed her that much until Kevin Franke decided to mention the Hannahs, and, you know, they were all friends, and the fact that they actually took Jody into their house for 6 weeks. But by the end of the 6 weeks, depending on who you ask Paige Hannah and her husband, they'll say that Jody Hildebrandt tried to seduce the husband and that she was harming herself and they had to let her go. But then if you then ask Jody, she would say that she was held against her will and she was tormented, etc, etc. And then when she then came back, she then basically moved in with Ruby and Kevin. Kevin says that freaky things were going on in the house, plates would smash across rooms, there'll be noises in the floorboards.
Like, sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and like stuff floating around, and it was weird, and I hated it.
So depending on who you ask, they both say different things, and I think Paige Hannah is going to get onto that in her third video because we're slowly building up to it. At first video, not tons of things of substance really stood out to me. She was basically just saying that, you know, Jodi was a master manipulator, which is something that we've heard from Jessie Hildebrandt, who is Jodi Hildebrandt's niece. We've heard that one before. Originally, Paige really liked the teachings, and the seed of what it was overall good.
Over time, we saw the best solution to teaching these helpful tools was to find coaches who were already within the program, already understood it, already benefited from it, to then become coaches and go out and teach. The benefit of that was that Jodi, through time, had started becoming more harsh. Instead of, like I had explained, instead of saying like, oh, if they're in a state of distortion, then they must be in pain. Like, how can I help you? You're in pain. It was like, well, you're obviously in distortion. It was gross.
And it's a bit of a theme throughout all of this. It makes me think of an MLM cult. And that does become a little bit more apparent with the way that they describe their business model, because funnily enough, it was a business model.
Ruby is a part of the original 10 women that are being trained to become mental fitness trainers. So Ruby, you want to tell us about what a mental fitness trainer is?
Yes. So we are getting mentally fit the same way your body would get physically fit by running and lifting weights and working with a personal trainer. We are getting ready to be your mental fitness trainer. We're getting truth, really easy to teach. We're making it very simple, boiling it down to principles.
And there's Paige. Did you get Pam?
Nope, Pam's over here. Pam. Hello.
They would train up these people who were called mental fitness trainers, whatever this means, and then they'll then send them out, and then they'll then try and get other people to join, and whatever they make, they give off a little bit of money back to Jodi.
Talk about different ways she could move to grow this program, not in a multi-level marketing format, but in an actual successful business, like many other coaching programs, like many other things. Johnny and I were trying so hard to come up with a plan for these coaches that were getting trained to have the freedom to go out and teach in their own method and their own manner, making a commission, or let's see, charging how they wanted, but then only giving a small portion to Jodi. You know, we had discussed the best business models over and over and over. And
combined with the fact that Kevin and Paige both recognize that this is a cult, you know, they're also talking about a fairly MOM standard business model. Paige does also want to stress that she did not know what a cult was. She also says that when she went onto the website for looking at Jodi's teachings, everyone was telling her that it was a cult, but at the time she didn't know what a cult was. I find that kind of remarkable. I mean, I suppose there are people that may not know what one is. You'd have to be in quite a big bubble to not even know what the definition of one is, and by the sounds of it, she literally had no idea, because she then started to tell us the definition of a cult.
If you had looked at Jodi's Google reviews, there were a lot of people on there that also said this was a cult. In my ignorance, I didn't know what a cult was, and I didn't know how a cult functioned. Do you know how a cult functions? Here's some key things that I've since learned. A cult has one person at the top who is the exception to the teachings that they teach.
And fair enough, you may not realize, but I would have thought that someone of that age would have at least known the definition of it. Whether or not you would be able to recognize it if you were in it, surely she would have heard of one before, but this is what she says. In fact, they'd actually laughed at Kevin originally for him saying that it was a cult, and then if you then listen to Kevin's police tapes, he does say that he thought it was a cult and it was a bunch of man-hating women. Paige also says that she never used to watch 8 Passengers, nothing like that, she never used to watch it, but I don't think she would have questioned any of the practices anyway, any of the kind of parenting practices, purely because she said that she'd heard about the wilderness camp and she had friends who also implemented a wilderness camp and she didn't see an issue with it.
I didn't watch their YouTube channel, so I wasn't aware of any practices that parenting practices that Ruby did that I thought were glaring. I was aware that she'd sent one of her children to Anasazi, where that could have been alarming. I had a lot of friends, I knew a lot of people in my high school who had also utilized this program.
This just goes to show the type of people that they were, the type of mindset that would be easy to get those kind of people on board. She was saying that in 2020, Jody started ringing Paige a lot and started telling her about all of these nightmares that she was having, and apparently these nightmares were like something out of a film. She didn't really know how to handle it, and Paige, in her own words, started to become agitated.
Jody started confiding in me. We would have business calls and then she would confide in me about having horrific nightmares. She said she wasn't sleeping, and when I asked the nature of these nightmares, they were out of a horror movie. I didn't understand them. I knew I wasn't qualified to help with them, but I just saw it as like she needed somebody to talk to, must have trusted me enough as a friend to explain it. One thing that was always common and present in these nightmares was that Satan himself was out to get her. Her belief on the flip side of she's called of God to teach connections to the world. And yes, I thought it was weird. It was one of those red flags where I was like, yeah, I see this as a red flag, but I don't know what to do with it.
She also said that she was getting really burnt out with the business model where you're basically taking in coaches, training them up, and then sending them out so that they can then go and get money to then bring back to Jody. The whole thing. So she said she was just getting agitated with just the overall glumness of Jody, and apparently this is when Jody started to kind of spiral downwards into this victimized way of being, where she was the perpetual victim.
And I was pregnant and had given birth to my 8th child in September of 2020. I think she could feel my agitation. I think she could feel that behind these phone calls, where Johnny and I were trying so hard to come up with a plan for these coaches that were getting trained, I was getting tired and agitated, and I think that was a part of why she started telling me her dreams. I think that's why she started expressing her personal life to me. To get a hook in to my heart, to control how I viewed her.
Then in 2020, when Paige and Ruby were doing their under the rug situation, Paige then realized that actually Ruby had quite literally gone to the dark side, and she was taking everything that Jody was saying as gospel, and if Jody didn't say it, then it didn't exist. Paige was trying to come at her about a topic from a different point of view, a more compassionate point of view, and Ruby looked at her dead in the eye and said, oh, Jody hasn't taught us that? Oh, why didn't Jody? So at this point, Ruby was just like a mini Jody. Paige is saying, or alluding to the fact in this episode anyway, that around the 2020 time, she had already realized that something wasn't quite right with Jody.
So it started showing some glimpses into her life behind closed doors. Started becoming more aware of her personal life, of her relationship with her children, and how it was different than it had ever been explained. Alarms were going off, and yet it wasn't enough for me to pull out. It wasn't enough for me to recognize that this is functioning as a cult.
Paige then took Jody in And that was when things started to unravel. And when Jodi then came back, she then had to move in with Kevin and Ruby because she was having visions and thinking that Satan was coming after her, and she was having dreams that she was riding a lion to God, that kind of thing. What Kevin was saying was that during this whole period, which is kind of contradicting a little bit of what Paige is saying, she took in Jodi. Supposedly, Paige and her husband were trying to convince her to join another cult that they had recently become a part of. So maybe she left Connections and that they were trying to get her on board with another cult to make an even bigger cult. Whatever the case may be, which doesn't really make a lot of sense considering Paige was just saying that, you know, she was starting to have a realization.
I don't know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. All I know is at some point within a couple days of that, in that month of March, the Hannahs drove down from Mapleton and picked Jodi up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, like, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into, so they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently. And
they referred to it as a cult at the time?
Oh no. No one in a cult says I'm in a cult. According to Jodi, she was held against her will for 6 weeks and was kidnapped.
Well, that Ruby, during this whole time period, because bear this in mind, Paige was saying that her and Jodi used to have these phone conversations where Jodi would be saying, yeah, no, I'm having, like, she at this point she was saying that she was having really bad nightmares. Apparently Ruby during this time period was really, really jealous of the relationship that Paige had with Jodi and said that they were really quite close.
Ruby was always jealous of the Hannahs, that they had a better relationship with Jodi than she did. Ruby, and this is like, goes back to her childhood. She wanted to be the best friend. She wanted to be the most liked. She wanted to be the one that everybody knew. And so it hurt her that she felt like she was being excluded from what was going on at the Hannahs' house. And then she'd say, why so many secrets? And the Hannahs would say, it's not secret, it's sacred. And when the time's right, you can know too.
And according to Kevin's interview, when Ruby was confronting Paige and Jodi about this, they would both say, it's not secret, it's sacred. So by the sounds of it, Paige was still kind of working alongside Jodi. And I can't really work out, you know, why Paige would continue to work with Jodi or work with Ruby when she's just said that before that time period, she was already starting to see red flags. But once again, I'm not trusting anyone in this situation. I'm just saying that something's not adding up on this timeline.
I thought that these teachings lent to that kind of home. And I think they could have, if the motive of the people using them could hold them in that light. But too many people who were good and full of light were like, no thank you, I'm out, because they could feel something off. But a lot of the people that stayed in it enjoyed the control that those teachings gave over others, enjoyed the position of, see, I'm above you because I know these things and you don't. And I am guilty of that kind of pride. So how do you not join a cult?
My overriding thoughts and feelings, though, is that we're going to have to wait for part 3 to really find out where the timeline is merging. Again, I just don't feel like Kevin is like the most reliable of sources, obviously. But I do feel like one of the only reasons why she's really saying anything is because she was called out by Kevin. And she kind of, you know, makes it sound as if she was losing interest and she wanted to cut ties and she was seeing red flags in 2020. Yet with Kevin's timeline, it's very much, you know, then a year or so later, she was inviting Jodi to the house and Ruby was jealous of the relationship. And whatever the case may be. So something is just not adding up, and it would be good to be able to close that gap. It's interesting listening to the various different people that are coming out who are being called out. The next person we need is Pam, and I don't think we're ever going to hear from Pam. I mean, even Chad, who is the eldest son of the Franke children, even he has come out and said that Pam needs investigating. Pam has just disappeared. Pam has fled. No one knows where Pam is. And Jesse Hildebrand, even they've said, Pam, I'm really surprised Pam hasn't been questioned. So that would be someone I would be really eager to listen to, but I don't think that day will ever come. I do think that by Paige Hannah speaking out, though, I wasn't really thinking of her as someone really integral in this whole thing. It was just the most interesting thing about it was the fact that she had invited Jodie to come live with her. That's the only thing I was really taking out of it, because they had a very large selection of these MOM cult-ish mental fitness trainers who were all doing similar things. It's just that Paige Hannah was obviously closer. I'm going to be really interested to hear part 3, because I feel like that is when the timeline is then going to start merging, and I'll then realize and go, oh, okay, that makes more sense, because at the minute some of it is not adding up. Wonderful day wherever you are in this world. Take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and I will catch up with you guys in the next video.
Got Johnny over there, Johnny.
And Johnny.
And Johnny. And me. And
There's Paige.
Did you get Pam?
Nope, Pam's over here.
Pam. Hello. Johnny is our male person who comes in and does the role play for the male, so we can practice. So he's quite talented to do the role plays with us, so we appreciate Johnny.